The words fell heavier than they should have. My brother's voice was calm, almost casual, when he said them. "Don't bring the will, we'll talk later." He didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes were on the floor, one hand adjusting the cuff of his sleeve as if this conversation were no more important than discussing what we'd have for lunch. But my chest tightened, because I knew what he was doing. He was trying to control the moment, to push something aside that mattered too much for me to allow it to slip away. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing against the folded papers I had carried for weeks. My heart hammered in a rhythm that almost hurt, each beat a reminder of why I had brought them here today, why I refused to hide them. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled the envelope out, placed it on the table between us, and let my hand rest there for a moment before I withdrew it. The silence between us swelled like a storm cloud. My brother's eyes flicked up, sharp now, his face tightening, but I didn't flinch. I had carried this weight too long to back down. The will wasn't just paper. It was my mother's voice preserved in ink, her last attempt at fairness in a life where fairness had often been absent. I had promised her, though not aloud, not in some dramatic deathbed whisper, but silently, in the way children promise things when they know no one else is listening, that I would protect what mattered to her. And yet, sitting across from my brother now, I felt the old imbalance rising again. He had always been the one with authority in his voice, certainty in his stride, the one who believed his version of reality carried more weight than mine. He wanted this conversation on his terms. But I couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not this time. I sat back in my chair, clasped my hands together to still their trembling, and let the weight of memory rise up inside me. Memories have a way of showing themselves when you least want them to, uninvited, relentless. As I looked at him, I thought of the countless times I had deferred, kept quiet, told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I thought of when we were children and how his voice, even then, could bend the room to his will. How he would declare what game we'd play, what rules we'd follow, and how I, younger and softer, would go along. I thought of my mother, always trying to smooth things over, reminding me, he doesn't mean harm, he just likes things his way. I swallowed hard. That phrase had followed me into adulthood, becoming both excuse and prison. And now, here we were, two grown people, with decades of history tightening around us like invisible rope. The envelope sat on the table like a barrier and a weapon both. He looked at it as if it might burn him. His jaw worked, but he didn't speak right away. Instead, he leaned back, folded his arms, and gave me the kind of look that made me feel, for a fleeting second, like the little sister who never quite measured up. But I stayed still, my eyes steady on his, because I knew if I faltered now, I would lose more than just this moment, I would lose myself. When I finally spoke, my voice was lower than I expected, almost measured. "We're not going to talk later. We're going to talk now." The words tasted strange in my mouth, like fruit that was both sweet and bitter. My brother's brows drew together, the crease between them deepening, but I kept going. This is what she wanted. We don't get to push it aside because it's inconvenient. We don't get to rewrite her wishes because they don't fit what you had in mind. He exhaled sharply, a small laugh breaking from his lips, but there was no humor in it. "You always did dramatize things," he said. "It's just paper." She wanted peace. She wouldn't want us sitting here fighting over signatures. His voice carried that familiar mix of superiority and dismissal, the tone that once had the power to silence me. But not now. Not anymore. My hands pressed against my thighs under the table, grounding myself. I thought of the nights after she passed, the emptiness in the house that once smelled of her cooking and carried her humming in the hallways. I thought of how I had sat alone, reading this will by lamplight, tracing each line with my finger as though the words themselves were a thread connecting me back to her. I thought of how she had written my name alongside his, equally, carefully, deliberately, as though she knew that without her hand guiding us, he would try to claim more than his share. She had known. Mothers always know. The silence stretched, and in it, I felt something shift, not in him, but in me. For so long, I had lived in his shadow, allowing his certainty to dictate the terms of my life. But grief changes people. It sharpens some, softens others. For me, it had awakened a stubbornness I didn't know I carried. I had buried her with my hands trembling, and I had stood at her grave whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But this was one promise I could. I wouldn't let her be erased. I wouldn't let him turn her will into just another piece of paper we could ignore. I leaned forward, resting my hands lightly on the table. She trusted us with this, I said, my words quieter now, but firmer. And I won't let you brush it aside. You don't have to agree with me, but you will respect her choice. Because if we don't, if we let this slide, then we've already failed her. And I won't carry that failure. His eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them. Maybe anger, maybe hesitation, maybe even guilt. I couldn't tell. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small in his presence. I didn't feel like the younger sibling trailing behind. I felt like someone who had a voice worth hearing, and I intended to use it. The envelope remained untouched between us, its edges soft from handling, its contents fragile but unbroken. And in that moment, I realized something that startled me. This wasn't just about inheritance, or houses, or even the will itself. This was about me reclaiming space in a story where I had always been cast in the background. This was about finally saying no to being silenced. This was about becoming someone my mother would have recognized, not the daughter who quietly stepped aside, but the woman who stood her ground. My brother didn't reach for the envelope. He just stared at it, the way one might stare at a snake coiled quietly in the grass, dangerous only if disturbed. His silence stretched so long that I almost thought he'd walk away, retreat to another room and let the matter hang between us, unsaid. That had always been his way. He never needed to shout. He believed in control through restraint, through the heavy weight of things left unsaid. And I, for most of my life, had been complicit in that silence. But this time, I refused to look away. I sat there with the weight of my mother's words inside that thin paper, and I forced him to share the air with it. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. The old clock on the wall ticked on, filling the silence with its stubborn rhythm. It was the same clock that had hung in our mother's living room for decades, its steady sound a reminder that time kept moving even when people didn't. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, his fingers steepling in that way of his that had always unnerved me. You really think she wanted this? You think she wanted us dividing things up like merchants at a market? His voice was low, measured, but there was an edge to it. His words cut deeper than their simplicity should have. He was trying to make me doubt, trying to make me feel guilty for insisting on something written and signed by our mother's own hand. I breathed in slowly, the faint scent of the wood polish on the table rising with it. It was the same table we'd sat at as children, our feet dangling above the floor, listening to Mother tell us stories of her own childhood, her voice soft but steady. That memory steadied me now. I thought of how she had always insisted on fairness, even when it cost her comfort. She never liked conflict, but she believed in balance. And that was what the will represented, balance. A balance my brother now resisted. She wanted us both to be seen, I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. She wrote this because she knew one of us might try to claim more than the other. She knew one of us might dismiss what the other deserved. I let the words hang, my meaning clear. His eyes narrowed slightly, but I didn't flinch. He laughed again, short, sharp, dismissive. You always did read too much into everything, he said. Not everything is a grand symbol. Sometimes things are just things. Paper is paper. Houses are walls and bricks. You've turned it all into some test of loyalty. He shook his head, leaning back again. You're exhausting, you know that? His words stung, though I tried not to show it. They always had. Because beneath the dismissal, there was a kernel of truth I couldn't ignore. I did read too much into things. I always had. Where he saw walls, I saw the memories they held. Where he saw objects, I saw echoes of people who had once touched them. And where he saw a will, I saw a promise. Maybe that was why life had always felt heavier for me. Maybe that was why I had always carried more than my share of invisible weight. I glanced at the envelope again, then back at him. You can call it exhausting if you want. But someone has to care. Someone has to remember that she was more than just furniture and property. That's why I'm here. That's why I won't let this go. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something flicker across his face, something like weariness, or perhaps even fear. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that same cool detachment. He reached for his glass of water, took a sip, and set it back down with a deliberate calmness that almost made me laugh. Everything with him was deliberate. Even now, even here. I found myself remembering a different day, years ago, when we were much younger. A winter afternoon, the two of us sitting in the same room, the heater humming faintly as the windows fogged. Mother had asked us to divide a box of old photographs she'd taken out from the attic. Keep the ones you want, she had said, so both of you can carry the memories with you. I had carefully chosen mine, photos of us as children, of birthdays, of her smiling as she stirred a pot on the stove. He, on the other hand, had taken the oldest ones, the black and white portraits of grandparents, the images of land and house. Even then, he had been thinking of legacy, of possession, of history as something you could hold in your hands and prove to others. I had chosen the intangible, the warmth of moments, the small joys. That day had ended with an argument, my tears, and his silence. Mother had intervened, as always, smoothing things over. But the divide had been there even then. It wasn't new. It had always existed. Now, decades later, it was sharper, deeper, impossible to ignore. The will was just another photograph, in a way. Another item to divide. Another test of what mattered more, things or meaning, control or fairness. He shifted in his chair, the sound of it scraping against the floor breaking the heaviness of the moment. Fine, he said, his tone abrupt. Let's see it then. Let's see what you think she left us. He extended a hand toward the envelope, though the reluctance in his gesture betrayed him. He didn't want this, not really. But he couldn't refuse now without looking like the one avoiding truth. I slid the envelope across the table. My hands shook slightly as I did, but I masked it by folding them together once more in my lap. He took the envelope, hesitated, and then pulled out the folded pages inside. His eyes scanned the first lines, his face unreadable. The only sound was the clock ticking and the faint rustle of paper as he turned each page. As he read, I felt my chest tighten further. I had read those words so many times that I could recite them by heart. I knew where her handwriting wavered, where the pen pressed harder, where she had paused before continuing. To me, it was her voice, almost alive again. To him, I couldn't tell what it was. Perhaps nothing more than ink. He finally set the papers down, his hand resting on top of them. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes harder now, colder. So this is what you've been clinging to, he said. This, division. Equal shares. You think that's fair? Yes, I said, surprising myself with how quickly the word left my mouth. There was no hesitation, no waver. Just certainty. It's fair because it's what she decided. It's fair because she knew us both. She knew me, and she knew you. He shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. You don't understand, he said. You never have. She wrote this because she wanted to avoid conflict. But she would have trusted me to handle things. She always did. You were the dreamer. I was the one who made decisions. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. And I will not let some piece of paper dictate what's right for this family. The old sting of his words returned, that familiar dismissal of me as someone too soft, too impractical, too emotional. For years, I had believed him. For years, I had accepted that maybe I wasn't the one suited to make decisions, that maybe I was better left in the shadows while he carried the mantle. But sitting here now, I realized something had changed. My mother had trusted me too. She had trusted me enough to write my name in her will, to give me equal ground with him. That was no small thing. That was her voice rising against his certainty, and I couldn't betray it. "You don't get to decide that," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Not this time. You don't get to rewrite her choices. Not anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than any we'd ever shared. It wasn't the silence of avoidance this time. It was the silence of something breaking. The silence between us seemed to stretch forever, like a taut string that could snap at any moment. My brother's eyes stayed on me, unblinking, and for a moment, I thought he might say nothing at all, that he might let the weight of his stare do the speaking. That had always been his weapon. He didn't need rage or volume. He could cut me down with nothing more than the sharp edge of his disapproval. I folded my hands tighter in my lap, the tendons in my fingers straining. Inside me, something was trembling, but outwardly, I tried to remain still. My mother used to tell me that silence was power, that sometimes words only muddied things. But this silence wasn't powerful, it was suffocating. It pressed against me, thick as smoke, until I finally broke it. "What are you thinking?" I asked, though my voice came out quieter than I intended. He leaned back slowly, his mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm thinking," he said, "that you've always mistaken stubbornness for strength." The words cut because they weren't entirely false. I was stubborn. I had always clung too tightly to things, held on long past the point of reason. As children, I had refused to let go of toys long outgrown, old sweaters that no longer fit, even scraps of paper with my mother's handwriting. I wanted to keep everything, as if keeping it could slow down the relentless passing of time. My brother, in contrast, shed things easily. He believed in forward motion, in letting go, even if it meant letting go of people. But this wasn't a sweater. This wasn't a scrap of paper. This was our mother's voice. And I wasn't going to let it be discarded. "She wrote it because she trusted me to hold to it," I said, more firmly this time. "And you can call it stubbornness if you want, but I call it love." At that, his expression hardened. "Love?" he repeated, as if the word were an offense. "If you loved her so much, where were you in those last months? Do you really want to compare hours sat at her bedside? Do you want me to list who paid for what, who made the calls, who carried the weight?" His words came fast now, like darts thrown with precision. "You think showing up at the end with your sentimentality makes you the chosen one? Don't fool yourself." I felt the breath go out of me. It was a low blow, and he knew it. Because there was truth buried in it. I hadn't been there every day. I lived further away, my work demanding, my own life complicated. He had been the one physically present more often, yes. He had carried some of that daily burden. I remembered the guilt of each phone call where I promised to visit soon, the way her voice had sounded smaller each time. I remembered arriving near the end and feeling the weight of time I could never reclaim. His words found that guilt and pressed down on it like a bruise. But guilt and love are not opposites. They can live together, intertwined. "You think I don't carry that with me?" I whispered, though my voice shook now. "You think I don't wake up some nights hearing her voice, wishing I had one more day, one more chance to sit with her? Don't use my grief as your weapon." My hands clenched together, my nails biting into my skin. "She forgave me for what I couldn't do. Can you say the same?" His face flickered, the briefest crack, and then the mask slid back into place. "You always find a way to make yourself the victim," he said coldly. "Even now. Even when the facts are plain." I wanted to shout, to stand, to throw the chair back and make him hear me. But shouting had never worked with him. It only gave him fuel, made him retreat further into that calm superiority. So I did the opposite. I grew quiet. I'm not the victim, I said. I'm the daughter who still believes her mother's words matter. And I'm not letting you erase them. I thought then of the last time I had seen her alive. She had been frail, her body smaller than I remembered, as though life itself had been folding her inward. Her eyes, though, had been sharp. She had looked at me and said, "Promise me you'll look after things fairly. Promise me you won't let him carry it all alone." I hadn't asked her what she meant exactly. I had just nodded, holding her hand, because the tremor in her voice had told me that time was running out. But in my heart, I knew. She had been speaking of this. Of now. My brother shifted again, his hand pressing against the will as if he could absorb it into his skin. She was confused at the end, he said suddenly, his voice softer now, almost reasonable. You know that. Her mind wasn't what it used to be. Do you really want to hang everything on words written when she was already slipping? The unfairness of it nearly made me choke. To use her frailty against her, to twist it into an excuse, it was cruel in a way I couldn't have imagined, even from him. Don't you dare, I said, my voice trembling but fierce. Don't you dare diminish her because it's convenient for you. She knew exactly what she was doing. And you know it. For the first time, his gaze faltered. He looked away, just for a second, and in that second, I saw the boy he had once been. The boy who had cried when our father left, who had clung to Mother's hand so tightly she had to pry him loose. The boy who had been told, too young, that he was now the man of the house. I realized then that perhaps his need for control wasn't arrogance alone, it was also fear. Fear of losing what little certainty he had clung to all his life. But realization didn't soften me. Not anymore. Because fear didn't excuse rewriting truth. The clock ticked on, its sound louder now, echoing in my head like a reminder, time does not wait. Time does not care for fairness. But people should. I pushed my chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the floor, and stood. My body felt heavy, my legs stiff, but I needed to move. I walked to the window, the late afternoon light spilling in, warm but dim. Outside, the garden was still, the flowers my mother had once planted swaying faintly in the breeze. She had loved that garden. She had spent hours tending to it, whispering to the roses as if they were friends. Standing there, I felt her presence more than ever. And it gave me strength. Turning back, I looked at him, still seated, still guarding the papers. You can fight me on this all you want, I said quietly. But every word on those pages is hers. Not yours. Not mine. Hers. And if you can't honor that, then maybe you don't deserve to call yourself her son. His face darkened, his mouth opening as if to fire back, but no words came. For once, he was the one silenced. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling now with the release of so much held in. My hands rested on the table, close to the will, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be, not behind him, not beneath him, but level. And yet, beneath the triumph, sorrow pressed in. Because this wasn't just about paper or inheritance. It was about the cracks in the bond between us, cracks that had widened over years and now threatened to split entirely. I wondered if we would ever bridge them again. Or if this moment, this fight, would define the rest of our lives. For a long while, neither of us spoke. My brother sat there with the will resting under his palm, his fingers lightly drumming against it as if testing its weight. His face had settled into that unreadable calm he wore whenever he wanted to mask anger, but I could feel it radiating from him all the same, a steady heat in the room. I sat opposite, my body taut, my heart heavy, but I did not look away. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was filled with memory. I could almost hear my mother's voice humming softly in the kitchen, the clatter of pots, the faint smell of onions sizzling in oil. I could almost see her glance through the doorway, her eyes flicking between the two of us, gauging the distance, always trying to soften it. She had lived her whole life trying to make peace between us. And here we were, the peace shattered anyway. Finally, he sighed and leaned back, his tone shifting. Softer now, smoother. You know, he said, you've always thought of me as the enemy. But I was never trying to take anything from you. I was trying to hold things together. You think I wanted to carry all the responsibility when Father left? You think I wanted to be the one she leaned on for every decision? I was a boy. I didn't have a choice. I studied him, caught off guard by the change. He wasn't wrong. I remembered those days too, Father walking out, leaving a silence in the house so loud it almost broke us. My brother had been barely a teenager, and suddenly people were calling him the man of the house, as if that title could turn a boy into an anchor. I, younger, had hidden in the folds of Mother's skirts, while he had been pushed into the role of protector. He had carried it like a badge, yes, but also like a burden. I never hated you for that, I said quietly. I hated how you treated me because of it. How you decided that made you better. Stronger. As if I was always behind you. His eyes flicked up to mine, sharp again, but there was something else in them too, fatigue, maybe even sorrow. I didn't decide that, he said. Life did. She needed me more. That's just how it was. I shook my head slowly. No. That's how you chose to see it. She needed me too, in different ways. I gave her things you couldn't. Comfort, softness. But you always measured worth by weight, by what could be carried. You never saw what I gave her. The words surprised even me, because I had never spoken them aloud before. They had lived inside me for years, small and bitter, but they had never found voice until now. Saying them felt like cracking open a door long rusted shut. He looked away, his jaw tightening. For once, he didn't argue. But he wasn't finished. He leaned forward again, his voice lower, more deliberate. Let's say you're right. Let's say she meant every word of this will. Equal shares. Fine. What then? Do you really want to split everything down the middle? The house, the land, the accounts? You'll sell half of what she built just to prove a point? The question hung heavy. Because beneath it was a truth I didn't want to face. Splitting things meant dismantling them. The house would be sold. The land divided. Mother's garden uprooted, her kitchen stripped bare. To honor her words might also mean destroying the physical spaces she loved. My throat tightened. I don't want to tear it apart, I said softly. I just want her wishes honored. Then let me handle it, he said quickly, seizing the opening. I'll keep the house. I'll keep things together. You'll have your share, don't worry. But let me decide how it's done. That's what she would have wanted. His eyes locked on mine, steady, persuasive. Trust me. The words stung more than I expected. Trust me. How many times had I heard that before? When he convinced Mother to let him take the family car even though it was mine too. When he told me not to worry about money, only for me to later find out he had kept more than his share. When he had dismissed my questions with that same calm assurance, trust me. And each time, it had meant giving up control, giving up my place. Each time, it had left me smaller. No, I said firmly, surprising both of us with the strength in my voice. I won't hand it all over to you again. Not this time. His face hardened instantly, the softness gone. You're letting emotion blind you, he snapped. This isn't about fairness. It's about practicality. You think you can manage all this? You've never handled anything on this scale. You'll drown in the details. The familiar sting of inadequacy flared in me. He had always known how to find the places where I doubted myself, the quiet insecurities I carried like shadows. And maybe he was right, I wasn't the practical one. I wasn't the one who made spreadsheets or balanced accounts with ease. I was the one who felt too much, who second-guessed. But then, I thought of her handwriting. The careful curve of each letter, her hand steady even as her body weakened. She hadn't doubted me. She had given me equal ground. She had believed I was capable, whether he did or not. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze head-on. I'll learn. I'll figure it out. But I won't let you take it from me. He leaned back sharply, his chair creaking under the motion. His eyes were dark, his mouth pressed into a thin line. He didn't answer right away, and in the pause, I realized something. He was no longer certain. For the first time, he couldn't rely on his old tools: dismissal, manipulation, control. I wasn't bending. And he didn't know what to do with that. I felt a tremor in my chest, not of fear this time, but of something stronger. Defiance, maybe. Or perhaps, finally, a sense of self. I thought then of all the years I had lived in his shadow. How many choices I had made to keep the peace. How many times I had swallowed my words because it was easier to let him lead. And how that had shaped me, quiet, hesitant, too willing to step aside. I thought of the friendships I had let fade because I didn't want to cause waves, the opportunities one had turned down because I wasn't sure I was enough. And I realized, with a sharp clarity, that this moment wasn't just about my mother's will. It was about all of it. It was about reclaiming the parts of me I had given away to keep harmony. It was about no longer living in the spaces he allowed. The clock chimed the hour, its sound loud and startling. I looked at him, still watching me, and I said, "You can't silence me anymore. I'm not the girl who trailed behind you. I'm not the sister you could talk over. I'm her daughter, just as much as you are her son. And I will not disappear." The words echoed in the room, louder than I expected, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something in his eyes: shock, maybe even respect. But it was gone quickly, replaced by that mask again. Still, the shift was real. And I felt it inside me like a spark. The longer we sat, the heavier the room felt. My brother's eyes followed me with a sharpness that made my skin prickle, as though he were searching for cracks in my resolve, waiting for the moment I would falter. He had always known where to press. He had always known how to turn the weight of the past against me. And I could feel him reaching for it now, pulling the old grievances from the shadows like weapons polished and ready. "You really think you're ready for all of this?" he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You couldn't even hold a job for more than a few years at a time. You moved from place to place, chasing things that never lasted. Do you remember how many times I had to step in? How many times I had to help you clean up after your choices?" His eyes narrowed. "You think she didn't notice that? You think she wasn't disappointed?" The words struck like stones thrown against glass. Old, fragile pieces of myself rattled under the impact. I remembered those years, the jobs that didn't work out, the cities I left behind, the relationships that crumbled. I remembered calling Mother, my voice heavy with apology, and hearing her soft reassurance on the other end. "You'll find your way, love. Don't be so hard on yourself." She never made me feel like a failure. But now, hearing his words, I felt the shame rise again, hot and choking. I pressed my hands together tightly in my lap, willing myself not to crumble. "She never measured me by what I did or didn't have," I said quietly. "She saw me. She loved me exactly as I was." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "Of course she did. Mothers always love their children. But don't confuse love with approval. She leaned on me because I was reliable. Because I didn't run when things got hard." His voice grew colder. "And you were always running." I swallowed hard. My instinct was to defend myself, to list the reasons for each choice, to explain the circumstances, the hardships. But I stopped myself. Because explanations were what he fed on. The more I justified, the smaller I became. So I said nothing. I rose from my chair instead, my body heavy with the effort, and walked slowly into the kitchen. The air in there smelled faintly of the spices Mother had once used, though the jars on the shelves had long since grown stale. I reached for the old kettle, its handle worn smooth from years of her hand. Filling it with water, I set it on the stove, listening to the click of the burner as it came to life. The simple act grounded me. The sound of water heating, the faint hiss, the weight of the porcelain cups on the counter, it was ordinary, familiar, and in that ordinariness, I felt steadier. When I returned to the table with 2 cups of tea, he raised an eyebrow. "You think this is going to soften me?" he asked. I set 1 cup in front of him anyway and sat back down with mine. The steam curled upward, warm against my face, carrying with it the faintest memory of her. She had made tea in this kitchen countless times, pouring it with that quiet grace that made everything feel lighter. She had believed that most arguments could be softened, if not solved, over a cup of tea. I sipped mine slowly, letting the heat burn against my tongue, grounding me further. "I'm not trying to soften you," I said at last. "I'm reminding myself that I don't have to fight you on your terms. I can sit here, and I can be steady, and I can honor her in the way I know how." His eyes darkened. Honor her by dismantling everything she built? By splitting it like spoils of war? "Honor her by respecting her words," I replied simply. He leaned forward, his voice low, almost hissing now. "You're making a mistake. You're letting sentiment cloud judgment. And when this all falls apart, don't expect me to fix it for you. Not this time." The words should have frightened me. Once, they would have. But instead, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Because I realized something in that moment, I didn't want him to fix it for me. I didn't want him to carry it on my behalf, to remind me once more of what I couldn't do. I wanted to carry it myself, even if I stumbled. Even if it hurt. I took another slow sip of tea, the porcelain warm against my hand. "Good," I said softly. "I don't want you to fix it. I don't need you to." His expression flickered, the briefest shadow of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't expected that. He had expected me to fold, to retreat. But I stayed steady. We sat there like that, the air thick with things unspoken, until finally he said, almost quietly, "You've changed." I looked at him over the rim of my cup. Maybe I've just stopped hiding. The kettle still hummed faintly in the kitchen, and I thought again of her, of Mother sitting in this very room, her hands wrapped around her own cup, her voice soft but sure. She had always believed I had more strength in me than I realized. Perhaps she had seen this moment long before I did. I set my cup down and reached for the wheel, placing my hand firmly on top of it. "This isn't about winning," I said, my voice calm now. "It's about remembering her the way she asked us to. And I won't let you turn it into anything else." His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't speak. For once, his silence wasn't control. It was uncertainty. And in that silence, I felt the first flicker of something new, something like freedom. The tea had grown cold between us by the time the weight of our argument finally settled into something quieter. My brother's hands rested on the table, one still brushing against the folded will as if he could absorb its strength through the paper. His face was unreadable again, the same shield he had always worn. Yet the sharpness in his voice was gone. What lingered now was something softer, though not gentle. More like resignation. The clock ticked in the corner, its sound measured, unrelenting. Outside, the evening light stretched long across the garden, the roses bowing their heads as the day slipped away. I found myself watching them, remembering how Mother used to lean down to breathe them in, her hands careful not to disturb the thorns. She used to say that roses carried both beauty and warning in equal measure, that you couldn't hold one without respecting the other. I wondered if she had meant for us to learn that too. "You know," my brother said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant, "she would have hated this." I turned back to him slowly. She would have hated us fighting, yes. But she wouldn't have hated me for standing my ground. He let out a breath, sharp through his nose. "You always find a way to justify yourself." I didn't rise to the bait this time. Instead, I folded my hands together and said, I don't need to justify myself anymore. He looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to see who it was sitting across from him. Perhaps he saw the sister he had underestimated. Perhaps he saw the reflection of our mother in the curve of my chin, the steadiness of my eyes. Perhaps he saw nothing at all. But for the first time, his gaze wavered. We sat in silence again, but it was a different silence now. Not suffocating. Not weaponized. Just tired. The kind of silence that follows storms. I reached for the will, sliding it gently toward me. He didn't stop me this time. My fingers brushed over the pages, the ink faded but still strong. I thought of her handwriting each line, her determination to leave us equal even when she must have known it would ignite this fire between us. I thought of her trust in me, her quiet faith. And I felt tears prick my eyes, not from weakness, but from the sharp ache of love and loss. You can keep the house if you want, I said softly, almost surprising myself with the words. You can live here, tend the garden, hold the walls together. I don't care about the bricks. But you won't keep it because you silenced me. You'll keep it because I allowed it. Because it's what I chose. He blinked, his brow furrowing. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want walls and bricks. I want her memory honored. I want her voice to matter. I want the balance she asked for. If that means money, fine. If that means selling land, fine. But you won't erase me. Not this time. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. And in that nothing, I felt my power. For so long, silence had been his weapon. Now it was mine. I stood, gathering the papers carefully, and slipped them back into the envelope. My movements were deliberate, steady. He watched me, but didn't move to stop me. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than him, though we hadn't shifted an inch in height. Walking toward the sideboard, I opened the drawer where Mother used to keep her important things, birth certificates, old letters, photographs folded at the corners. I placed the envelope gently inside. Closing the drawer, I laid my hand on the wood for a moment, breathing deeply, as if sealing something larger than paper. When I turned back, my brother was still at the table, his face unreadable, his hands clasped together as if holding back words he couldn't yet form. I'm not your enemy, I said softly. But I won't be your shadow anymore. For a long while, he didn't respond. Then, finally, he said, maybe you should have told me that years ago. Maybe I should have, I admitted. And for the first time, I didn't feel shame in the admission. Just truth. The evening grew darker, the garden outside fading into silhouettes. I poured the cold tea down the sink, rinsed the cups, and set them upside down on the rack the way Mother used to. Small motions, ordinary motions, yet each felt like a claim to something I had lost and was slowly reclaiming. When I returned, he was standing now, his hand resting briefly on the back of his chair. We'll talk again, he said, his tone flat, but not unkind. Then he walked past me, his steps heavy on the floorboards, leaving me alone in the room. I sat back down at the table, my hands resting flat on its surface. The wood was warm under my palms, scarred in places from years of use, from Mother setting down hot pots or dragging vases across it. I thought of all the conversations this table had held, our laughter, our arguments, our silences. And now, this. I didn't know what the future would hold. I didn't know if my brother and I would ever truly see each other, or if this fracture would widen until it became a canyon between us. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty, I had found my voice, and I wasn't giving it back. As the night deepened, I stood and went to the window one last time. The roses swayed in the breeze, their petals catching the last traces of light. I thought of her tending them, her hands gentle yet firm, her quiet strength. And I realized something with a sharp ache in my chest, she had planted more than roses. She had planted us. Different, thorned, imperfect, but hers all the same. And as I closed the curtains, I whispered softly to the empty room, I kept my promise, Mother. I didn't let you disappear. The clock ticked on, steady as always. Time moving forward, carrying me with it. I left the table then, not as the shadow of someone else, but as myself, whole, seen, and unafraid.